4 in the morning, while Lima still sweated under nightclub neon and fish stink, Maribel Rojas painted secret suns onto broken crates. A shy assistant in a taxidermy shop by day, she spent her mornings stealing color from alley dust, beet skins, and rainwater. Her fingers smelled like glue and chamomile tea bags because store-bought supplies cost more than a week of her wages. Every crate she rescued from the market carried scars of salt, hooks, and handling, and she painted directly over those wounds. She painted gulls with crooked wings, women with tide pools in their chests, and streets that seemed to bend toward escape. By sunrise, she stacked the murals behind the freezer, where glass-eyed foxes and stiff herons waited beside unlabeled jars. No one at work guessed the quiet girl brushing dust from mounted pelicans had built a hidden gallery from other people's trash. She finally carried her best crate into a polished Lima gallery, heart kicking hard enough to make the painted birds tremble. The curator stared at the warped wood, rubbed a thumb through her beet-red pigment, and laughed like he had discovered mold. Another gallery called the work dirty, another called it unstable, and another asked whether she planned to become serious someday. She walked home, holding her crate against her chest like a shield, hearing their laughter rattle around inside the empty wood. Rejection did not arrive once for Maribel. It arrived in batches, like fish dumped onto a slab, slick and hard to touch. She began hiding the finished pieces longer, turning them toward the wall whenever anyone entered her room, as if embarrassment had a smell. Even her materials seemed to accuse her, with tea-stained glue peeling at the corners and alley dust smearing her cuffs red. One dawn, exhausted and angry, she sliced a mural into palm-sized scraps, convinced failure looked smaller if you cut it down. The scraps were strange and alive, each tiny square holding a mouth, a staircase, a moon, or half a drowning horse. She almost threw them into the canal, but the wind flipped one onto the back of a waiting delivery scooter. The little sketch clung there like a lost prayer, fluttering above a dented taillight as the driver sped into traffic. Maribel stood frozen at the curb, watching her failed piece disappear between buses, and felt something in her chest turn electric. If galleries would not let her work hang still, maybe the city itself would carry it. The next morning, she filled her pockets with miniature sketches, brush-clipped clothespins, and sticky paste brewed from old chamomile tea bags. At every red light, she fastened a painting to the back of a scooter, a bread cart, or a rattling produce bike. Tiny storm-colored birds rode through Miraflores. Bleeding red moons bumped over potholes in Barranco. Half-finished saints flashed past fish stalls and pharmacies like private miracles in motion. She was terrified someone would stop her, shout at her, or peel every sketch off before noon. Instead, she saw drivers cruising unknowingly through whole neighborhoods, with color trembling behind them like new flags. By the third day, a florist had tucked one of her sketches beneath twine on a bouquet bicycle. By the fifth, a courier added a plastic sleeve to protect a painted woman from drizzle. By the end of the week, strangers had started posting photos of the moving scraps without knowing the artist had tied them on at dawn. Maribel followed those images on a borrowed phone in the taxidermy stockroom, surrounded by antlers, moth dust, and preserved eyes. Her work looked different out there, not precious or apologetic, but reckless, alive, and impossible to ignore for long. The city had done what the galleries would not. It gave her art motion, context, and a pulse bigger than her fear. Soon she changed her strategy with obsessive care, noting which intersections held traffic longest and which scooter routes crossed the richest mix of neighborhoods. She began designing for speed, using thicker outlines, bolder figures, and symbols a passerby could grasp between one stoplight and the next. She stopped mourning the cracked crate as a failed canvas and started treating limitation like a design instruction from reality. If the surface warped, she painted waves. If the glue stained, she built rust-colored skies around it. If the alley dust clumped, she turned the grit into walls, wounds, and weather. What embarrassed her in a white room became unforgettable in the street, because context can turn defect into signature. That was her first real breakthrough. Stop asking whether your tools look respectable and ask whether they make your work recognizable. Her second breakthrough came from repetition, not inspiration, because she kept attaching art every morning, whether she felt brave or not. Tiny daily acts built a network larger than any single perfect masterpiece, and consistency made room for surprise to find her. One rainy Tuesday, a university student tracked down the scooter artist by following a trail of familiar red pigments back to the market district. He posted a grainy photo of Maribel beside a fish crate mural, eyes down, hands stained crimson, standing in front of mounted owls. The image spread because it felt too strange to be invented and too honest to look like a branding campaign. Suddenly, journalists wanted to know about the assistant who made paint from scraps, and galleries wanted to revisit their earlier laughter. Maribel nearly said no to everyone because old humiliation can make new opportunity feel like another trap, wearing cleaner shoes. Then she visited the abandoned train station near the river, where flickering neon bled onto cracked tiles and weeds pushed through old departure lines. Under that broken light, the place felt exactly like her materials, discarded, stubborn, and waiting for someone to call it beautiful. She chose the station for her solo show, not because it was fashionable, but because it understood survival without polish. Workers hung her fish crate murals between rusted pillars and suspended hundreds of tiny scooter sketches from wires like migrating paper birds. When the doors opened, people moved slowly through the station, as if entering the inside of a memory the city had been carrying for months. Couriers recognized pieces they had unknowingly displayed. Street vendors pointed at familiar moons. Students found the same red dust they had seen trailing through intersections. For the first time, Maribel watched strangers look at her work without asking permission to dismiss it first. The flickering neon washed her face pink and gold, and she saw tears on her own hands before she felt them. Success did not arrive as a trophy or a check. It arrived as a terrifying correction to the story she had told herself. She had always believed she was an accident, a timid shop assistant making weird things before dawn no serious room would claim. But that night proved the room was never the authority. The connection was. She was not waiting to be chosen by a gatekeeper. She had already been chosen by repetition, resourcefulness, and people who felt something flash alive in traffic. That realization changed more than her career. It changed the posture of her life. She started signing her name in the corner of every piece, small at first, then steady, then impossible to ignore. She asked for fair prices instead of apologizing for handmade surfaces. She taught neighborhood teenagers how to make pigment from peels, dust, and leftovers instead of waiting for ideal supplies. She kept one rule pinned above her bed: make the smallest shippable version of the thing you are too scared to share. If your dream feels too large to carry, cut it down to a version that can move today. If the proper room keeps rejecting you, find the route people already travel and place your work there with intention. If your materials seem unworthy, learn their behavior until weakness becomes texture and texture becomes identity. And if laughter meets your first attempt, treat it like weather, not prophecy, because ridicule is often just unfamiliarity speaking too confidently. Maribel's city became her lesson board, showing her that visibility grows when effort meets public life, instead of hiding in private perfection. Her old train station show sold out, but the real victory was simpler and harder to fake. The shy woman in the taxidermy shop no longer flinched when someone called her an artist, because she finally believed the word belonged to her. Every dawn after that, Lima still woke to fish smell, wet concrete, and scooter engines, but now her name moved with them. Somewhere in the early traffic, another impossible scrap of color kept teaching the same stubborn truth. Begin with what you have, then let it travel.